My friends, what would you do if the neighbor that you didn't really like had his house on fire? Well, if you were Israel, you would run out, add more fuel to the fire, sprint into his garage, glance at that dream car that you always wished for, and seize this unique opportunity to take that car back home.
Chaos is a ladder.
That's right, today we will talk about Syria, that is now ruled by mostly peaceful jihadists. Long story short, Israel exploited the collapse of the regime of Bashar al-Assad to occupy new territories in Syria. I mean, they already annexed the Golan Heights. How much more land does Israel want? To achieve this, within a span of 10 days after the fall of the Assad regime, Israel conducted close to 500 airstrikes across various Syrian provinces. This bombing campaign resulted in the destruction of much of Syria's military assets and equipment. That's not all. Israel pushed its troops beyond the 1974 demarcation line and advanced into the UN buffer zone of the Golan Heights. They also got their hands on the Syrian side of Mount Hermon, the tallest peak in the entire region. So yeah, in the end, Israel just snatched some prime real estate. Since then, the IDF kept creeping forward, building more checkpoints and military bases. Here on the 11th of March, Israeli newspaper Haaretz reported Israeli army to set up new posts in Syria. The next day, the Jerusalem Post wrote, Israeli fighter jets fly low over Syria. One of the latest examples in this series of Israeli airstrikes happened on the night of the 21st of March against the Syrian cities of Palmyra and the T4 airbase in Homs. The Israeli government is now openly using intimidation tactics and military force to threaten the new Syrian regime. At the same time, Israeli officials have a good reason to be suspicious of the new regime and their HTS combatants, especially after the massacres of Alawite and Christian civilians on the coastline. So what are Israel's objectives in Syria? Prime Minister Netanyahu explained it very clearly on the 23rd of February 2025 when he outlined his vision for southern Syria in 3 points. Number 1, the IDF will remain indefinitely on Mount Hermon. Number 2, Syrian forces will not be allowed south of Damascus. Number 3, the IDF will ensure the safety of the Druze in Syria. Now the question is this plan going to work? This is exactly what we will analyze in this video. Welcome to HistoryLegends and hear the latest news from the Middle East. If you're new to this channel, make sure to like and subscribe. As you know, some of my videos have been targeted with limited or no ads. So make sure to check out my Patreon or PayPal to keep the show running. Thank you to everyone that has already helped and welcome to the headquarters. Before we start, you have to understand the Israeli doctrine of the war between wars, or Mabat Bein Milchamot in Hebrew. Essentially, it's an aggressive strategy aimed at preventing your adversaries from gaining strength in a future conflict through preemptive actions. You guessed it, for Israel it's mostly done using airstrikes. One good example of this doctrine is when Israeli fighter aircraft repeatedly targeted Hezbollah assets in Lebanon throughout the 1990s. Years before Israel and Hezbollah entered in open confrontation. Following this war between war doctrine, the Israeli Air Force bombarded Syria with impunity to eliminate Iranian-linked targets since 2013. Between 2021 and November 2024, Israel carried out more than 135 airstrikes and released the thickest loads against various enemy assets across Syria. And this despite the fact that Israel and Syria were not even officially at war. All this changed on the 8th of December 2024, with the fall of the Assad regime. Actually, 10 days before, Israel agreed to a ceasefire with Hezbollah the night before HTS launched its offensive against Assad forces. Must be part of an ultimate coincidence. Anyway, let's go back to the night of the 7th of December. Israeli government officials gathered and were presented with numerous risks, but also with a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to completely annihilate Syria's military potential. In an operation named Arrow of Bashan, Israel's Air Force and Navy conducted 480 strikes across various Syrian provinces, 4 times the amount of bombardments of the past 4 years combined within a span of 48 hours following Bashar al-Assad's toppling. In the first week since the fall of the Assad regime, Israel struck Syria close to 600 times. The song I Bombed Beirut Every Day should now be renamed I Bombed Damascus Every Night. The destruction of the Syrian army's military equipment was total. These strikes targeted Syrian warships in the port of Latakia and Minat al-Bayda Bay. Reportedly, 15 vessels were sunk, including at least 6 OSA-1 and OSA-2 missile boats. We can also believe all 6 Tier 2 Iranian-made fast attack craft torpedo boats were also destroyed. The Israelis also bombed a number of air bases, like here in Khalkhala, where they annihilated the Syrian Air Force in the process. Here in the Al-Ta'ala airport, there's nothing left of the Syrian fighter jets. At Mazah Air Base, Israel destroyed numerous air defense systems and all the helicopters. There was also this Russian-made Panzer medium-range surface-to-air missile that had been captured by HTS. Well, this missile system was tracked down and then destroyed as well. The IAF also targeted ammunition depots, like this one near Tartus, which reportedly registered a 3.0 magnitude on seismic sensors when it detonated. On top of that, radar systems, military signal stations, and other military equipment were also burnt to the ground, like this base in the desert storing Scud missiles and their launchers. According to Israel's general staff, this first wave of bombardments destroyed 80% of Syria's military capabilities, and nearly 90% of identified surface-to-air missile batteries were destroyed. Honestly, these figures are impossible to verify. It's most likely exaggerated. All we know is that the damage was indeed consequential. As a result, many Israeli officials called this the largest air operation carried out by its air force in its history. And in the end, Syria lost the bulk of its military hardware. Now this aerial bombing campaign still fell into the realm of Israel's previous airstrikes against Syria, just on a much larger scale. However, the status quo was broken when Israeli armed forces entered the demilitarized zone on the Golan Heights. They simply waved shalom at the UN Blue Helmet bystanders as they crushed all the barbed wire and seized several checkpoints in the UN buffer zone. For the first time since the 1973 Yom Kippur War, the Israel Defense Force had officially entered and seized Syrian territory. Is it me, or when an army is called Defense Force, they always end up on someone else's territory? The excuse of the IDF? We need to be in forward defensive positions. AKA they need a buffer zone, a very large buffer zone to prevent the guys that they just pissed off from attacking them. Here you can see Israeli army soldiers taking control of the central police station in Quneitra Governorate. That's how more and more troops were poured into Syria. At first, IDF units just peeked inside the UN buffer zone until they fully took it over. Here's a before-after of Israel's control in the Golan Heights between the 8th of December and mid-March. Overall, we can notice an advance of 5 kilometers eastwards. At the same time, some Israeli commandos also rushed towards Mount Hermon. So let's start with point number 1 laid out by Netanyahu. The IDF will remain indefinitely on Mount Hermon. Why is this mountain so important in the first place? Mount Hermon is located at the corner between Israel, Syria, and Lebanon, right at the center of the party.
It's location, location, location.
It's also the highest point in the entire region, with a peak at 2,814 meters above sea level. It's like a treehouse from where you see everything in the neighborhood. You got it, for Israel occupying Mount Hermon provides a strategic advantage in case of an open conflict with its northern neighbors. As a matter of fact, it's not the first time that Israel tried to take Mount Hermon. During the Six-Day War in 1967, Israel took over the southwestern slopes of Mount Hermon as well as part of the Golan Heights from Syria. During the 1973 Yom Kippur War, Syrian commandos stormed the Israeli outpost on Mount Hermon, a battle scene that was depicted in the TV show Valley of Tears. On October 8, 1973, the IDF attempted to recapture Mount Hermon from Syrian control, but were repelled, resulting in significant Israeli casualties. It's only on the 22nd of October that the Israelis successfully counterattacked and retook all their lost positions. This was followed by the 1974 disengagement agreement and the deployment of UN peacekeepers. These 3 battles for Mount Hermon during the 1973 war cost Israel 100 KIA and as many wounded. On the 8th of December 2024, Israeli special forces from the Shaldag unit captured the peak of Mount Hermon at the cost of 0 soldiers. Was it legal? Probably not. It definitely wasn't. Netanyahu said this is a historic day and even added that the 1974 agreement was null and void. In the end, Israel managed to snatch a very strategic position, essentially, for free.
Naughty, naughty.
Mount Hermon towers over the current air defense base of Mount Meron, which stands at 1,208 meters. If equipped with advanced radar and surveillance systems, Hermon could serve as an early warning hub, detecting potential threats such as missile and rocket launches, drone incursions, or infiltration attempts. Additionally, controlling this high ground enables Israel to oversee Hezbollah's logistics lines and movements across the border before they become operational threats. And of course, the cherry on top, the bird flight distance between Mount Hermon and Damascus is only 40 kilometers. Just in case, just in case. On the 11th of March, the Times of Israel reported, atop Mount Hermon, Minister of Defense Katz says Syrian leader will see indefinite IDF deployment. Ahmed al-Shara and the new Syrian regime are of course against this Israeli encroachment. But at the same time, what else can they do? Which leads us to point number 2. No Syrian forces from the new regime are allowed to deploy south of Damascus. De facto, we're talking about the full demilitarization of Syria's southern provinces of Quneitra, Dera, and Al-Suwaida. We have to admit that since 2022, the word demilitarization has gotten very popular. On the 11th of March, Minister of Defense Katz said, "Every morning when al-Shara opens his eyes at the presidential palace in Damascus, he will see the IDF watching him from the peak of Mount Hermon. And remember that we are here and in the entire security area of southern Syria to protect the Golan and Galilee residents against any of his threats and those of his jihadist friends." I mean, that is pretty straightforward, but it's also against international law, it's bullying, and a clear threat at the new Syrian regime. At the same time, what can al-Shara do? If columns of the new Syrian army headed towards the Golan Heights, they would be obliterated within minutes by Israeli aviation. Out in the open, with no air defense, they would stand no chance. In the past 2-3 months, Israeli forces creeped their way forward beyond their earlier positions. In the process, there were no real firefights. Other than that, it's just non-stop airstrikes. For example, on the 8th of February, Israeli fighter jets struck a weapons depot near the Syrian town of Deir Ali, south of Damascus, as well as the former base of the 1st Armored Division, also located south of Damascus. After weeks of Israeli airstrikes on Syria, the population started getting very angry. So on the 25th of February, Syria had no other choice but to call for Israel's withdrawal from its lands. It's very obvious. We all know what happened next. A couple hours after the statement by Syrian officials, the Israeli military conducted aerial bombardments targeting military bases and command centers in southern Syria. That's how Israeli warplanes hit the town of Kisweh, approximately 20 kilometers south of Damascus, as well as the southern province of Dera. The Israeli defense minister also said that any attempt by the Syrian regime forces to establish themselves in the security zone in southern Syria will be met with fire. Meanwhile, as for ground forces, Israeli units supported by armored vehicles advanced 3 kilometers towards the village of Batna. What do you want al-Shara and his HTS combatants to do? It's an army mostly operating pickup trucks and technicals. Imagine the damage if they just tried to make a move towards the Golan Heights.
Fire all the drones now!
3 days later, on the 28th, Israeli forces infiltrated the village of Al-Bakr, located on the administrative border between Dera and Quneitra governorates. And that's not even the worst part. In early March, the New Arab reported, Israeli forces launched deepest ground incursions yet into southern Syria. We learned that some Israeli troops took hold of a former Syrian army base located on a hilltop near the village of Al-Mal. Problem is, this hilltop is located 13 kilometers away from current Israeli positions. Reports claim that some soldiers were airdropped and then bulldozers came to flatten the area. This new fortified outpost is clearly beyond the former UN buffer zone, so this could mark a new phase of Israel's expansion into Syria. On top of that, the Al-Mal hill is also critical because it is only 25 kilometers away from the main road linking Dera to Damascus. And it's also a perfect lookout point since it's one of the highest peaks in the 20-kilometer radius. A couple days later, on the 9th of March, the head of the IDF visited Israeli positions in southern Syria. That's when we learned that Israeli troops actively swoop settlements but also locate and capture weapons while operating within Syrian territory. And often they do so in very covert operations that take place at night and that are not mentioned in the media. The Jerusalem Post also revealed that units belonging to the Paratroopers Brigade, the Armored Corps, and the Special Forces Yahalom unit under the command of Brigade 474 conducted targeted raids in Syria. Once again, we have the term targeted raids, which seem to fall into the IDF's doctrine labeled as defensive operations. But most importantly, all these units that I just mentioned are elite formations. It's not a coincidence that they're all positioned there. At any moment, they could charge.
Damascus, Orens. Damascus.
Meanwhile, Israel's bombardment campaign continued. For example, on the 10th of March, Israel carried out airstrikes targeting former Syrian army bases. And on the 17th again, a new set of aerial bombardments targeted various military bases. What we do have to admit is that there were relatively few civilian casualties in all these Israeli airstrikes that started since the 8th of December. In the end, Ahmed al-Shara, his HTS combatants, and the forces of the new Syrian regime cannot do much at the moment against Israeli penetration into southern Syria. I mean, if al-Shara does make a move, his HTS combatants will get crushed, and as a result, so will his power. A situation that could leave another power vacuum in the country. The only card that al-Shara can play is to rally the Druze to his cause, like he did with the SDF forces and the Kurds. Which leads us to point number 3. The IDF will ensure the safety of the Druze in Syria. Long story short, the Druze are part of a monotheistic and esoteric faith founded in the 11th century. Druze faith developed from Shia Islam, but also integrates elements from Christianity, Zoroastrianism, and Greek philosophy. The Druze people are numbered at about 1 million people and can mostly be found in Syria, Lebanon, and in Israel. So Netanyahu's position is a double-edged sword that could fracture the Druze community, which is now caught between local and regional powers. Some critics argue that Israel's expressed concern for the Druze only serves as a pretext for creating additional buffer zones within Syria and territorial expansionism. It's a very valid claim and it's most definitely part of Israel's battle plan. At the same time, we cannot forget the ties that link the Druze community to Israel. There are approximately 150,000 Druze living in Israel, roughly 15% of the entire community. As a matter of fact, the Druze community does not dream of statehood like some others. So for this reason, the Druze have been fully integrated into Israeli society. For example, the majority of these 150,000 Druze living in Israel have accepted Israeli citizenship. That's not all. Druze men over 18 have been drafted into the IDF since 1957. Still to this day, every year about 900 Druze are conscripted into the IDF, many of whom joined the Erev Druze battalion. Some of them even reached high positions in the hierarchy of the IDF. Historically, Druze soldiers have played a vital role in Israel's military operations. Between 1948 and 2010, 369 Druze soldiers were reported to have been KIA. Meanwhile, 20,000 of Israel's Druze live on the Golan Heights. And for the most part, they have rejected Israeli citizenship. Now, allegedly, the fall of Assad's regime led to a surge of military recruitment in these Druze communities of the Golan. An extra 200 recruits were reported by the IDF, something unimaginable a couple of years ago. Now, talking about these Druze from the Golan Heights, after the Israelis took over this territory in 1967, entire Druze families, thousands of people were expelled or just preferred exile. Overall, 100,000 Syrians were displaced from the Golan Heights as a result of the war, of which 20 to 30,000 Druze. Let's just say that Syrian Druze have a poor memory of Zionism. The Druze from Syria, although making up only 3 to 4% of the total population, or about 700,000 people, are all concentrated in the south of the country, mainly in the suburbs of Damascus or in the As-Suwaida governorate, where they make up 90% of the population. For many years, the Druze community voiced its opposition to the Assad regime, and we must remember that on the 6th of December 2024, it's a coalition of Druze tribes that rose against Assad forces and marched on Damascus. On the 13th of December 2024, a couple days after Israel's penetration into Syria, The collective of Druze community leaders condemned the Israeli invasion. As a matter of fact, after Netanyahu talked about his plan for Syria, Druze religious leaders from the suburbs of Damascus invited security forces from the new Syrian administration into their city, reaffirming their commitment to Syrian unity. On top of that, the Men of Dignity movement, the largest armed faction in the Druze community, as well as the Mountain Brigade, recently brokered a deal with the Syrian government. Just like the Kurdish forces of the SDF, they could be integrated into the new Syrian army, all the while maintaining their command structure and identity. Lebanese Druze leader Walid Jumblat recently echoed these sentiments. Jumblat and many Druze recall the fate of Bashir Gmayel and Lebanon's Christian Maronites. During the Lebanese civil war, they pursued an independent alliance with Israel, only to be labeled as traitors and targeted by Sunnis, Palestinians, and Shias. And eventually Lebanon's Maronite forces were abandoned to their own fate by Israel. Today in the Syrian Druze community, many fear the same fate. Netanyahu's promises of protection sound very good, but they could disappear overnight with a change of Israeli leadership, leaving the Druze community vulnerable to reprisals. However, recent fighting on the Syrian coastline and the reported massacres of thousands of civilians belonging to religious minorities like the Alawites and the Christians highlights the fragility of the post-Assad Syria. With such tragic examples, the Druze could very well be the next in line to face the wrath of HTS combatants. Historically, the Druze community was led by tribal chiefs, and an increasing number of voices now speak of some form of autonomy. Israel is also carrying out a large operation to conquer the hearts and minds of Syrian Druze. For example, on the 13th of March, Israel has delivered approximately 10,000 packages of humanitarian aid. The next day, on the 14th, 100 of these senior figures went to visit sacred Druze shrines in Israel, the first time in 50 years. Israel is also experimenting to hire Syrian Druze people to work on the Golan Heights, to provide a financial incentive for this community to turn towards Israel instead of Damascus. In conclusion, Israel has exploited the fall of the Assad regime to achieve a number of goals. So let's go back to Netanyahu's 3-point strategy for Syria. Number 1, the IDF will remain indefinitely on Mount Hermon. I don't see Israeli forces leaving this very strategic position anytime soon. As a matter of fact, I think they will dig in and heavily fortify it. Number 2, Syrian forces will not be allowed south of Damascus. Like we have seen in the past months, Israel has already destroyed the bulk of Syria's military assets. The terrain of southern Syria is also very flat, with barely any cover, so an offensive operation by HTS would be suicidal. On top of that, the new Syrian regime barely has any air defense systems left. The only thing we could think of is that maybe Turkey could provide some military equipment to the new Syrian regime, but that's hypothetical. By the end of March, according to the latest videos, it seems Damascus ordered the withdrawal of its last forces from southern Syria. Number 3, the IDF will ensure the safety of the Druze in Syria. This is Israel's weak point, and where al-Shara can exploit this weakness to his advantage. It all depends if he can control his most extremist elements and prevent them from attacking the Druze community. Actually, there's one thing that al-Shara could also do. Launch a massive seduction campaign towards the Druze community, really create this Druze component as part of the new Syrian army, and send the same Druze formations towards the Golan Heights to stop the Israelis. This would be the greatest challenge for Israel's objectives in Syria. That's all I have for you today. Let me know in the comment section what you thought of my analysis. If you're new to this channel, make sure to like and subscribe. And if you want to support my work, make sure to check out my Patreon or PayPal. The links are in the description below.